In 1996, a cigar-shaped UFO would crash in Brazil, but its occupants would survive and make their way to the nearby town of Varginha. The military would move fast, capture the beings, some living, some dead, and deliver them to a mysterious US Air Force plane that would fly out of the country. Then, the Brazilian government would initiate a cover-up. But this event left too many witnesses, many of whom would later come forward. Civilians, medical personnel, and even from the military itself. Their testimonies would include a range of stories: a crash site, seeing the beings firsthand, watching the military shoot and capture the beings, surgeries on an alien in a hospital, threats and intimidation, and even possible alien communication. This has since become one of the most reputable cases of ufology. This is the UFO Files, the Varginha Crash. Sometime in January, before the event, a local farmer would see a strange craft outside of his window. It was a cigar-shaped object, and it would land nearby. He would close all of his windows, and his family would hide indoors until dawn. But when dawn came, it was gone. This craft would then be seen again, but this time it would be damaged. At 1 a.m. in late January 1996, something would startle the cattle at the Castillo farm. The noise of the cattle woke up Orlina and Enrico de Freitas. In the sky was the same large cigar-shaped UFO.
Ficou parado.
E essa estava flutuando. Estava flutuando no pasto aí. Até eu brinquei com ela. Eu sei, esse negócio parece submarino.
It was as close as 16 feet or 5 meters to the ground, and gliding slowly and silently. What was more unusual was that it was now spewing white smoke from a gash on its side. It would fly slowly away until eventually it was gone. A fourth witness, Carlos de Souza, would then see this craft, but this time it would crash. Carlos's story has changed over the years, so I will be using his earliest recorded testimony first, and including any additions afterwards. On January 13th, 1996, Carlos de Souza was traveling from Sao Paulo to Minas Gerais to meet with friends and together fly ultralight aircraft. He began driving at 4 a.m. and the trip was as expected, until something strange happened at 8 a.m. He heard a tumbling noise, like a washing machine. He was worried it was his engine and he pulled off to the side of the road. When he exited his car, something caught his eye. It was this object which was making this strange tumbling noise.
Não é cheio de luzinha, farolzinho com luz, nada disso. Ele era objeto metálico, você vê que era objeto bem polido, uma superfície bem lisa, e ele brilhava devido à claridade do dia, a luminosidade batia e refletia. Isso era o que me chamou muita atenção.
He would see the same damage the couple had, but the craft was now visibly struggling to remain in the air and was slowly losing altitude. Strangely, he also described what may be windows on the side, though this could have been further damage.
Aqui, ó, tá? Seria como se fosse a nave, tá ok? Isso aqui seria como se fosse um charuto, tá ok? Só que era um pouquinho mais arredondado aqui, tá? E aqui tinha janelas redondas.
He feared it was a distressed airplane or other type of human vehicle and decided to follow it for about 10 miles to help.
Nesse exato momento, qual a minha intenção? Poxa, tem pessoas precisando de ajuda. Tá caindo uma aeronave.
Eventually, its flight pattern then became more erratic just before it made its final descent, and the tumbling noise got even louder. Its engines then gave out, and it crashed just outside of view.
Eu vejo a aeronave passar bem próximo a uma copa das árvores, relando nas copas das árvores e sumindo atrás de uma pequena montanha.
Carlos would then drive around looking for it. According to Carlos's earliest original testimony, when he made his way to the crash site about 20 minutes later, he would see a full-scale military recovery operation already in progress.
Para chegar no local, só que eu cheguei lá, como eu expliquei, já havia alguns soldados lá e bloquearam a passagem e me obrigaram literalmente a voltar. Quais veículos a mais tinha lá, além dos dois caminhões? Tinha um helicóptero do exército, bem grande. O helicóptero não era esse helicóptero pequeno, esse helicóptero bem grande que carrega piris, coisa. Ambulância branca? É ambulância manchada de cores do exército. Aquela tipo camuflada.
As soon as he exited his car, he was overwhelmed with a strange, terrible smell. It was the smell of ammonia.
Porque o cheiro que estava era um cheiro de amônia, um cheiro com uma água podre de amônia, era um cheiro horrível, que queimava.
And before him was the craft, or what was left of it. Half of the cigar-shaped object had fallen apart and was now scattered in front of him, and the other half, he predicts, was still mostly intact but out of sight behind a hill. Curious, Carlos picked up one of the pieces of metal, and it had strange properties.
E aí me chamou a atenção que ela era muito fina, parecia aquele papel alumínio. Eu peguei, vi que era bem resistente e amassei. Tentei amassar assim. A intenção minha era botar no bolso e vir embora. Só que quando que eu solto a chapa, tirei os capotes, tirei a mão para ver se ela simplesmente fez isso. Voltou para o mesmo formato.
However, Carlos wouldn't have long to investigate the wreckage. The soldiers there quickly made their way over to him. They began getting forceful with him, and they told him he had to leave. In his appearance in James Fox's Moment of Contact, Carlos de Souza now claims he was there first, and after about 15 minutes, a military convoy came from the opposite direction that he himself had come from, and that when the soldiers confronted him, a gun was pointed at his face. Carlos has a slightly inconsistent testimony, but I wouldn't call him a liar. This case was over 30 years ago. And as we would learn, Carlos would almost immediately be threatened following this incident. He drove away from the crash site and stopped at a local gas station for coffee and food and to mentally unpack what he had just witnessed. But he was followed. And when he exited, he saw a dark-colored Impala had pulled up without a license plate, and out stepped two very tall-looking men in black suits with military haircuts. When they spoke to Carlos de Souza, they knew more than just his name.
O rapaz virou para mim e falou para mim, olha, você é o Sr. Carlos, o rapaz sabia meu nome, o nome dos meus pais, e é tudo. Sabia quem eu era, quem não era. E o rapaz falou, olha, você não viu nada, você não sabe de nada. Eu falei, não, mas quem uma vez falou, você não sabe nada, cala a boca e vai embora, que é melhor para você.
Carlos would then cancel his trip and drive back home to Sao Paulo. On a visit to the crash site by Ubarajara Rodriguez and his team, and according to Carlos, they would find nothing in the area was growing, and it appeared to have chemical burns, including on the trees. When Ubarajara returned to the location, he discovered that an area of 400 square feet was replaced with sod, which is a layer of grass that you roll out onto the soil, almost as though someone was trying to hide something. Later on, when James Fox and Carlos de Souza go back to the crash site in Moment of Contact, it still appears that things struggle to grow there. In Moment of Contact, he talks about an acid that was burned into the ground. It doesn't appear he personally noticed any chemical leakage during the encounter, just the soldiers, vehicles, and debris, but was trying to communicate with James Fox that the later findings with Ubarajara showed that something had burned into the area, not that he directly noticed it at the time. As for his account as a whole, Ubarajara would say this: "There are things that favored Souza's report, but we have to say that we could not verify it." One thing de Souza had not seen were any aliens, and that was because they were making their way from the crash site to the town of Varginha. The first sighting of an alien came in at around 8 a.m. when a call came into the fire department over what onlookers believed to be a strange animal. Dangerous animals can be a problem in Brazil, and the fire department, which is also part of the Brazilian military, is often called to handle rabid, poisonous, and wild animal issues. The fire department would respond 2 hours later at around 10 a.m., and 4 men and a fire truck were dispatched. When the firemen arrived, they met with 5 civilians, a man, woman, and 3 young boys, all of whom saw the creature descend the embankment into a nearby small forested area. The 4 firemen told the witnesses to leave and descended the hill towards the trees. The entire event was watched at a distance by nearby construction workers 300 feet or 100 meters away, about the length of a football field. For 2 hours, they saw the creature run away from the firemen and continually hide in the brush. The construction crew initially assumed it might be a child due to its short stature. That is, until they saw it more clearly. They described brown, shiny skin, an oversized head, bright red eyes, and 3 bumps on its head. Rather than thinking it was an alien, now they thought it might have been an escaped animal from the zoo. While trying to capture the being, one of the firemen returned to the vehicle and radioed their commanding officer, explaining the situation with the bizarre creature. Eventually, the being was cornered, the men captured it, allegedly with a net, and brought it back up the steep embankment. The being was in panic and was making a noise described as the sound of bees, and it was said to have cried like a child.
The creature was captured. It was in the net, but as they came up to the road, the firemen found that military personnel were waiting for them, and that the military personnel would now take the body.
The firemen placed the creature in a wooden box and gave it to the soldiers, who then placed it on a flatbed truck and took it away, allegedly to ESA, the nearby military base. Dr. Lear, a prominent American ufologist and surgeon, would visit Varginha in 2002, and alongside another leading Brazilian ufologist, Uberajara Rodrigues, they would interview many first-hand witnesses of Varginha. He published a book called UFO Crash in Brazil, where he discusses his first-hand investigation. They both visited the Varginha fire station to try to ask the firemen more about this event. I asked the firemen if they knew what happened to the vehicle used in 1996 for the capture of the creatures. They told me the vehicle I was just sitting in was the very same fire truck. I was stunned. At this point, I could not resist asking them if they knew more about the case. They told me they were not present at the time, but had been at this facility since the day the original fire crew had been transferred. Just down the road where this alien was captured with a net, there would be another lesser-known encounter, told by Uberajara to Dr. Lear. During this encounter, one creature was captured and another was possibly shot and killed. He would preface the story with this statement. There are a couple more events I'd like to tell you about that are important to the case. Some of these may confuse the issue, but I will leave it up to you to make your own judgments. According to an anonymous witness who came forward to Uberajara, at 2 p.m. of that same day, he was jogging just down the street from where the firefighters were earlier that day, when he saw at least 7 armed military personnel enter the same wooded area at the bottom of the incline. They appeared to be searching for something. He lost sight of them as they entered the dense trees. But then, gunshots. The soldiers exited the trees. 2 military personnel had one sack, and the other 2 shared the burden of the second one. The witness said one bag was squirming, and the other was still. As the day went on, the military was now placing armed blockades in the town, threatening both civilians and the press alike. And yet, another encounter with a being would happen, this time with 3 young women. 2 sisters, Liliane and Valkyria Silva, 16 and 14, and their friend, Katia Javier, 22, would enter an unused grass lot. Liliane was in front and looking around at the graffiti on the wall, when she saw something hunched over, squatting against the wall, and facing away from her. She was only about 8 feet away from it. She called towards the others, and when she did, the creature turned its head to her. Liliane screamed and ran, as the other 2 women ran ahead to see what was happening, and they also saw this creature. Its face had 2 bright red eyes, 3 times larger than that of a human, and a very small, shrunken mouth.
Tinha perna e braços normal, de homem normal, assim. Mas o que a gente olhou direito não era assim, homem. Tinha chifres, tinha assim, a pele marrom, parecendo que passou com algum óleo no corpo. Tinha um pé grande, uns olhos super arregalados, vermelho. O corpo dele também, que ele tava agachado com a mão no meio das pernas.
O corpo bem com as veias estufadas, tipo que tivesse lutado, não sei. Eu tava com as veias do corpo tudo estufado.
Looking back at the encounter, they described the being as appearing in distress. The women discussed what they had seen amongst themselves and thought, due to their Catholic upbringing, it might have been a demon, but they weren't sure. They continued to run to the home of Liliane and Valkyria's mother, Luisa. Luisa and Katia got into a vehicle and returned to the lot, but whatever this thing was, it was now gone. But it left traces of itself behind. They noticed either a footprint or a handprint in the dirt and grass, with what appeared to be 3 digits. The sisters, in subsequent interviews, said they noticed no strange smells during the initial encounter, but the mother and Katia described something overwhelming in the air when they returned to the lot. The next encounter would involve the capture of one of these beings, and likely the exact same one the girls had seen just earlier. At 6 p.m., a brief but violent hailstorm would begin. at 10 p.m., a military police vehicle would drive down a road just 1.5 blocks away from the woman's sighting. Inside was Eric Lopez and Marcos Eli Chereze, a 23-year-old P2 soldier in Brazil's military police. P2 officers or soldiers operate in intelligence gathering, and that night, their orders allegedly were to look for anything out of the ordinary. And that's exactly what they saw. Another NHI or alien, likely the same one the three women had seen earlier, was now crossing the street right in front of their car. They quickly stopped, Chereze exited, and he captured the creature with his bare hands, possibly getting cut in the process. At first, it was taken briefly to a local clinic, described by Dr. Lier as closer to a first aid station without physicians. But it was soon brought to Hospital Regional as now part of a larger military convoy. An anonymous radiologist at this hospital would come forward to James Fox in Moment of Contact and describe how he was forced to perform x-rays on a black body bag.
Pedir que eu fosse fazer as radiografias das partes que foi solicitada. Crânio, coluna cervical, tórax, abdômen, bacia, perna e braços.
The military men stared at him and said nothing, not even to each other. After the x-rays were finished, the images were taken before the radiologist could examine them, and he was threatened. And although now the mysterious body bag was now gone, something remained, the overpowering smell of ammonia. And here we find another strange and rare witness testimony. A man would claim he performed surgery on this alien or NHI's leg at this hospital, and would even communicate with it. Alongside Ubarajara, Dr. Lier would interview this next witness for his book. But this next witness testimony wasn't taped. Ubarajara Rodriguez arranged for Lier to meet with a surgeon from the Hospital Regional.
This witness heard I was coming to town and called Ubarajara Rodriguez and said that he would be willing to talk to me. Not as any kind of a UFO investigator, but as a colleague.
Yes, yes.
In the book, Dr. Lier described it as a group of people he was talking to, but told Art Bell that this was to help his anonymity, and it was just one person.
I was saying physicians before because we had promised this individual total anonymity and secrecy, and so I synthetically multiplied the number.
This witness came forward under two conditions: the interview not be recorded, and the story only be published outside of Brazil.
Why this provision of no recording equipment?
This man was frightened to death. This for him was a catharsis. He had not spoken to anyone in 6 years. He was threatened not only with the loss of a job and his license, but he was threatened with a little more serious consequence.
That would all do it.
The singular witness was an orthopedic surgeon, and he had fixed the broken leg of the creature brought into Hospital Regional. Initially, he would claim he knew information about the creature only secondhand from when it was there. But as the interview went on, Lier realized this was not secondhand information. This man was the primary witness. The hospital was not really very busy that night, as we had only about half the beds occupied, and weren't seeing any emergencies coming in. We were told by one of the surgical orderlies that there were some military vehicles pulling up in the back of the hospital. The night became more unusual when the military personnel began to restrict access to the hospital. People were no longer free to come and go as they needed, and they were primarily guarding the surgery room. The military was very dominating. We knew they brought a patient in through the back door of the hospital and brought them directly into surgery. We thought there must have been a really bad accident on the base. The other thing that really upsets us was that we were told not to talk about this to anyone once it was all over. We were strongly warned from the beginning. The surgeon was only told he would be fixing a fracture in the leg of the patient. 2 guards were at the door of the operating suite, and the witness assumed the patient was already on the table ready to be operated on. Everyone was quiet, and the military personnel would only occasionally communicate, but in low tones, so as not to be heard. The surgeon was given no prior medical data and was being sent in essentially blind. We slowly approached the table. When I first saw the face of the individual lying there, I was in a state of shock. It was far from a human face. Certainly no face I'd ever seen before. The eyes were large and red, and staring at the ceiling with a blank stare.
The doors were shut. They told him, don't come out until he's resolved the medical problem. Don't ask questions and just do your thing, very matter of fact. So he was there with the surgical personnel and so on. There were some x-rays that were up on the view box. He looked at the x-rays and found that there was a compound fracture of the leg.
The site of the fracture was the upper thigh, and the bone was protruding out of the skin, but the blood had coagulated very quickly. According to the witness, when examined under the microscope, it was similar to human blood, and it was dark red, but the platelet count was very high and prone to coagulate almost immediately outside of the body. Lear then asked if the bone was similar to human bone.
He said the bone was, again, very similar to human bone, except it was a little more pink in color, and then it contained what is called medically lacunae. And these are holes or apertures that are in the bone. He said it almost looked like osteoporotic bone, which in human is a diseased bone, which the calcium drops out and has holes in it.
Now, you're likely wondering if this alien was awake. Yes, he was. It kept moving its head, but mainly stared upwards at the ceiling. We did make an attempt to communicate verbally, but did not receive an answer. We were concerned as if to whether it was feeling any pain, but we really had no way of knowing. When we examined the fracture site, it did not jerk away, scream, or give any sign of discomfort. Its respirations were shallow, as if it needed very little air to sustain itself. Could you detect a heartbeat or pulse? We tried to determine exactly that, and we could not tell. Sometimes we thought we could hear a heartbeat, and then other times it was absent. We found the same with the detection of a pulse. It's here we get possibly the most accurate description of the beings to date. Assuming the witness was telling the truth, that is. The color of the skin was a dark brown, which appeared to be shiny, like it was oily or wet, but in fact, the skin was dry. Up close, the skin was described as reticulated, meaning the undertones gave the appearance of a web of veins. When touched, this would go away. The skin was also smooth to the touch. More strangely, there were no nipples or navel, and no mention of genitals. The hands ended in 4 fingers with no thumb. The fingers were strange and different than human fingers. The creature was able to move each of his fingers so that they could articulate with each other, and by doing so, was able to probably perform all the functions we could with the use of our thumbs. And then we get to the feet. There were 3 short fleshy toes that looked more like pads than toes. There were no visible toenails or fingernails. There was an additional appendage that hung down from the medial side of the foot. This vestigial appendage was elongated like a finger and ended in what appeared to be a claw about 3/4 of an inch long. Later, when we found the being walked, it could move this appendage so that it became parallel to the rest of the foot. This allowed it to ambulate in a normal human-like manner. They opted to not use general anesthesia because they were worried the gases may have an unknown effect, and instead used local injected anesthesia at the wound before the surgery.
And, he knew that what he had to do was to, of course, put the bone back, set the fracture, and so on.
Yes.
And at some point, he said he lost control, and that whatever was happening was that whatever was laying there was controlling the movements of his hand. They fixed the wound without internal fixation. That means no plates, no pins, no screws, no wires.
Right.
Because when the bone ends were approximated, he couldn't move it.
You're telling me it healed right away?
The whole thing healed, he said, within 24 hours. Bone and superficial tissue.
But there was one more strange part of the story. The alien communicated with the surgeon. It was so bizarre that at first, the surgeon hesitated to tell Dr. Lear. After they had finished the surgery, a greenish mist began to fill the room. One of the nurses banged at the door, but they were told to find the source of the mist before being allowed to leave. It was coming from the creature. In deep fear, I walked slowly closer to it and approached the head of the table. Without consciously realizing it, my gaze caught the eyes of the being. His eyes were glowing red and appeared as 2 swirling pools of liquid. They were pulling me in deeper and deeper. all at once giant portions of information came pounding into my head. They were like thought grams, large blocks of information, over and over and over, like someone hitting me in the head with a hammer. I was also becoming dizzy and slightly nauseated. The surgeon said he had headaches for 2 weeks after the event, and his mind had downloaded tremendous amounts of information, but he was only willing to share 2 things.
And he said the first thing the creature said was that he felt sorry for human beings.
The first is that all humans have the same potential and abilities to perform the very same things his race could do. Those things we find so marvelous and magical, but humans did not know how to do them. The second reason they felt sorry for us was we did not seem to realize we were spiritual beings, only living in a temporary shell, and we were totally disconnected from our spiritual self. According to the witness, the being healed fully in a 24-hour period and was then taken by the military. At the end of this interview, Dr. Lear said this of the witness.
He's now sitting in a chair with his head bent over, his hands out in front of him that are absolutely shaking.
Hold it.
Tears running down his face.
This wasn't the only surgery the being would get. In 2023, a new witness would come forward to James Fox, Dr. Italo Venturelli, a neurosurgeon at Hospital Regional. He was motivated to come forward by surviving a recent heart attack. He would back up the testimony given to Dr. Lear that this being had received surgery at this hospital, though this would be a separate surgery he would discuss. He claimed a former, now deceased colleague, Marco Vinicio Nueves, a fellow neurosurgeon, had performed a surgery on this being. The exact surgery is speculated to be a cranial valve surgery.
Eu fui chamado para ver paciente, né? E quando eu fui ver, não era ser do nosso planeta, né? Que fui chamado eventualmente para dar minha opinião sobre o caso, e eu vi o caso sob o ponto de vista médico.
Unlike previous descriptions, it was white-skinned and only had reddish or lilac-colored eyes.
Parecia uma criança de uns 7 anos, branquinho, não tinha mau cheiro, a cabecinha grande, mas em forma de gota, né? Boca pequenininha, uma das mãos estava dentro de um campo e outra para fora. O olho não era vermelho, estava lilás, também em forma de gota, e me olhou de uma maneira muito tranquila, não estava agitado, não estava agressivo, não estava com dor, e na minha opinião não estava com medo também.
And it communicated to him telepathically as well. The message would be that he, the alien, was okay. He would be in his presence for 3 to 4 minutes before the military entered and took the being and would threaten him. This alien, following these alleged surgeries, would be moved to Hospital Humanitas, but would pass away at this location from unknown causes.
Witnesses tell that the creature was kept in a quarantined area, heavily guarded by military personnel. Many doctors were seen coming and going, and only a few nurses were able to attend this creature, which apparently died within a day's time.
Here we meet an anonymous witness from the military, dubbed Military X. He came forward to James Fox after months of negotiation with Marco Leal for a moment of contact. His testimony was that his job was transporting the dead alien out of the city. Military X was appointed as one of the drivers of a military convoy which would head from Essa military base to Humanitas Hospital, bring the body back to Essa, and then to Fort Campinas. And in front, leading it, was a mysterious, non-military vehicle. They parked at the back of the hospital, and Military X went inside and saw his cargo. There, in a wooden box, was the corpse. Its body was covered, but its feet were sticking out. Around the box were doctors and soldiers, and one man with a camera, but he wasn't recording.
O que me chamou a atenção, que eu esqueci de falar, foram o pé. Assim, tá? Praticamente 2 dedos.
Military X would be shooed away and return to his vehicle where the body would be loaded on. The convoy stopped overnight at Essa military base. He would continue to drive the body from Essa to Campinas. You might be wondering, why are they moving a dead alien to Campinas? Well, someone was waiting for them there. A US Air Force plane had landed without authorization from the government and was now waiting for the bodies. After the Americans had received the bodies, both living and dead, they flew them out of the country. And now the aliens were gone. This, however, isn't exactly the end of the story. About 3 weeks later, on February 15th at 8 a.m., Marco Chereze, one of the military police who captured the NHI, was admitted to the hospital, and within 7 days, he was dead. But what led up to this? Well, after the capture, Marco's sister, Marta Tavares, said her brother was acting differently.
Vocês perceberam se ele estava meio estranho, assim, mudou pouco a atitude dele?
Antes do caso ou depois?
Antes e depois, assim, antes ele era normal.
Antes normal. Depois ele se retrancou pouco.
And then, his physical health began to deteriorate. He developed extreme pain in his lumbar area and was admitted to the hospital on February 12, 1996. The first tests were done for a herniated disc, including an X-ray, but nothing was found. But then, Marco developed a fever. Dr. Cesario Lincoln Furtado was also interviewed by Uberajara for Dr. Lear's book, and here we get some more details on the strange death of Marco Chereze. The blood analysis which arrived in the afternoon showed leukocytosis with a shift to the left, and toxic granulations in the neutrophils. This was the sign of a serious infection, highly capable of provoking a poisoning. What does this mean exactly? Marco's body was rapidly producing white blood cells, also called neutrophils. When white blood cells are released without full maturity, they can contain coarse granulations inside, known as toxic granulations, which aren't exactly toxic in of themselves, but show the immune system was now on overdrive in response to an infection. Marco Chereze's body was essentially going into sepsis. His immune system was destroying itself in the process of fighting what seemed to be a bacterial infection. And whatever this bacteria was, it was incredibly drug resistant. Antibiotics were used, and they did nothing.
The sister of the deceased military police officer described symptoms that to me were very similar to Ebola infection.
His condition worsened, and he was sent to intensive care on February 15th, given more antibiotics, but within hours was dead, and the hospital staff had no idea how to explain it. The mystery of Marco's strange death didn't just die with him. His sister and wife attempted to get autopsy reports, death certificates, and medical records, but were denied. Marta also began to grill Eric Lopez, the other man in the car that night, and she wanted answers.
Como ele era o melhor amigo do meu irmão, e era ele quem comandava a viatura no dia, e a gente foi perguntando, e ele foi desviando, mas fumava um cigarro atrás do outro e aquilo ele transpirava. Ele transpirava muito. Ele é meu cunhado e hoje ele não toca nem no assunto mais.
After prolonged legal battles, she got the documents she wanted, but even then, they were missing pages. When she finally got everything, she was still no closer to any answers because the only person who could give them, Eric Lopez, still refused to talk. In the 2022 documentary Moment of Contact, James Fox attempted to go to the home of Eric Lopez, and Eric, in response, threatened to shoot them. The following month, in March, another strange thing happened, or may have happened. And Dr. Lear interviewed separately the two sisters, Liliani and Valkyria, and their mother Louisa, to make sure their story added up, and he found something he didn't expect. In their separate interviews, they mentioned a strange dream a couple months later that made him think they may have been abducted. The following is directly from Dr. Lear's personal interviews with the women. At any time after this event happened, did you have any strange dreams? Well, I don't know. Maybe one. It was about 3 months after this all happened. I dreamed I was flying and seeing stars and planets and stuff. It was really weird and I felt rotten when I got up in the morning. I must have gotten a cold or something. I just felt rotten. My mother remembers it well because Liliani also didn't feel so good. Maybe it was something we'd eaten or the flu. I don't know. Liliani, did you at any point have any strange dreams following this incident? Well, there is one I can think of that happened about 3 months later. I dreamed the creature was in my room, and I wasn't afraid. That was all. I don't remember the rest. Did you ever have any lifelike dreams that involved flying machines or strange beings? I never told anybody about this, but just after what happened to my daughters, I had a dream that my daughters and I were sucked up out of the roof of our house into an airplane. I was terrified and don't remember much else about it. This family would have one last encounter almost as scary as the original, but this time it was humans in dark suits. At around 9 to 10 p.m., Louisa heard a knock at her door. She was offered money in a foreign denomination, likely US dollars, and she would get it on one condition. Her daughters tell the public that their encounter was a lie. This was an insult to her, as she had been standing by her daughters since day one.
Estão falando verdade, eu dou a minha palavra, porque elas não iam brincar com uma coisa tão séria desse jeito. Isso eu confirmo, 1000 vezes se for preciso.
She threatened to call the police, and eventually these strange men left. Finally, on May 8th, the military would have a formal press conference in response to the allegations. General Lima of Essa military base would address the people, and, as expected, denied all of the allegations. This event would live on, and rumors would still circulate well after the January 20th encounter, and more reports would come in about encountering strange beings. In April, one was seen by a woman at a zoo, staring at her from a distance at night, illuminated by the glow of its eyes and wearing a golden helmet. Roughly 3 weeks later, just like with Marco Chereze, animals would begin to die of a mysterious infection. In May, while driving, one would be seen by a student on a road, and when he went back to the location with investigators, it was next to the Castillo farm. It's possible these later cases are just people trying to also get into the headlines for fun, but we really can't know.
To me, it looked like a leprechaun to me. All you gotta do is look up in the tree. Who else seen the leprechaun and say yeah? Yeah!
However, the testimony from the original encounter is among the strongest of all of ufology. Too many witnesses are telling stories that line up, despite never having met. This may be ufology's holy grail. And that's the story of the Varginha case. I suggest you purchase and watch Moment of Contact to watch even more testimonies that I did not include in this video. But before I go, I have a theory on this case. Jacques Vallée, a pioneer in ufology, says there is a strange absurdity to some UFO cases. Yes, they really happened, but may have been deliberate scenarios by the aliens themselves. And such scenarios may be a method of communication that we as humans can recognize. In other words, the neighbors may be interacting with us in the same way a parent may teach a child with fairy tales or stories, something they can understand. We are a young, still evolving species after all. I believe the Varginha case happened, and there may be more moving parts than we realize. This has been Lately, ending transmission. Special thanks to my members, Alpha Vold VFX, Megan Garcia 4971, Joda Pancake, Patreon Lev 1384, Jacob Buxton 932, this guy, and McJohn 69.